It was a warm summer evening on August 3rd, 1999, when the Colburn family of Niagara Falls, New York, sat down for what would be their final dinner together. The father, Richard Colburn, 42, was a respected park ranger who had worked the trails and gorges of Niagara State Park for over 15 years. His wife, Eleanor, 39, was a school librarian, quiet, warm, and beloved by neighborhood kids. Their two children, Jamie, 14, and Lucy, 9, were well known in the area. The family lived in a modest two-story home just 2 miles from the American Falls. Neighbors described them as the kind of people who brought you soup when you were sick. Nothing about them suggested trouble. But the next morning, all 4 of them were gone. No signs of a struggle. No note, just a front door left slightly ajar and a flickering porch light that stayed on well past sunrise. Police arrived that afternoon, called by Eleanor's sister, who hadn't heard from her. Inside the home, everything was in place. Dinner plates still sat in the sink. The television was paused on a local news broadcast. Eleanor's purse was on the dining table. Richard's work boots were at the door. Upstairs, the children's beds were unmade, as if they'd left in a hurry. The strangest clue? The family's dog, Scout, was found locked in the backyard shed, alive, unharmed, but clearly agitated. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. The Colburns had simply vanished. Investigators were baffled. It didn't make sense. An entire family couldn't just disappear in the middle of the night without leaving a single trace behind. But within 72 hours, the worst was confirmed. The bodies were found. Rangers searching the eastern edge of Devil's Hole State Park, an area Richard often patrolled, made a gruesome discovery. At the base of a narrow ravine, partially hidden beneath pine branches and rocks, they found the lifeless bodies of all 4 Colburns. They had been murdered with a brutality that shocked even the most seasoned officers. Richard and Eleanor had been stabbed multiple times, their throats slit. Jamie had defensive wounds. He had fought back. Lucy's body was found cradled in Eleanor's arms. All of them had been stripped of identification, jewelry, and shoes. It was as if the killer wanted to erase their existence completely. The area showed no drag marks or tire tracks. It was as though the family had been brought there and carefully placed. The entire town of Niagara Falls went into mourning. Candlelight vigils were held in the park where Richard once worked. Schools closed for a day to honor the memory of Jamie and Lucy. News of the crime spread quickly across the state, then nationally. The phrase Niagara family slaughter became a grim headline in newspapers. Locals couldn't comprehend how something so evil had happened in a place known for its beauty and tourism. Crime scene experts scoured the ravine and the Colburn home for weeks. Yet no murder weapon was recovered, no fingerprints, no tire imprints, no DNA, not even a partial shoe print. It was as if the killer had floated in and out like smoke. It wasn't long before people started calling him the Ghost of the Falls. As leads dried up, a composite sketch was created from a single eyewitness, an RV traveler who claimed to have seen a tall man with gloves entering the woods that night. But the description was vague, and the man couldn't be found. Police checked local sex offenders, parolees, and known criminals. Nothing matched. Dozens of tips came in. None led anywhere. One psychic claimed the family had been sacrificed in a cult ritual. Another tip pointed to a traveling carnival worker. But all theories failed under scrutiny. The crime scene was too clean. The killer had left no trace, no message, and no motive. Investigators began to suspect it wasn't a random act, but a premeditated execution. That made it worse. It meant someone had studied them. The more detectives dug, the more chilling the picture became. Richard had no enemies. Eleanor was kind to everyone. Their finances were in order. There were no signs of abuse, infidelity, or shady dealings. The children had no issues with friends or school. There was simply no reason. Niagara County Homicide formed a task force, Operation Falls Silence. It was headed by Detective Raymond Alder, a 20-year veteran of the force, known for his stubborn commitment to unsolved cases. Alder believed the killer had military training, maybe law enforcement experience. The precision, the control, the absence of clues. It didn't feel like a first-time offender. This guy didn't get lucky, Alder told reporters. He knew exactly what he was doing. He planned it down to the last second. As the weeks turned into months, the pressure grew. Locals were afraid to let their kids play outside. Tourists canceled trips. Businesses near the park reported fewer visitors. Niagara Falls was becoming known for blood, not beauty. Alder followed leads to other states. He interviewed suspects in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and even Canada. He tracked a man living off-grid in upstate New York. He interrogated a drifter in Buffalo who claimed to know the Falls killer. But every lead hit a wall. Public faith in the investigation started to collapse. A $50,000 reward was announced. A hotline was set up. But no one came forward with anything real. The image of the family, especially little Lucy, clutched in her mother's arms, haunted the community. And then, just like that, the killer vanished into history. By December of 1999, the Colburn murders were officially classified as a cold case. Alder continued investigating for years, long after the task force was dissolved. But without physical evidence, suspects, or even a clear motive, there was nothing more he could do. In a final press conference, he stood outside the station with a photo of the Colburn family taped to the podium. Somewhere out there, the person who did this is living a normal life, he said. Shopping at a grocery store, walking past children, maybe even smiling. The town of Niagara Falls held one final vigil. Then, slowly, the headlines faded. The house was sold. The story slipped into whispers. Locals warned newcomers not to go near Devil's Hole after dark. And the man who killed the Colburns became a myth. The ghost of the falls had vanished without ever leaving a name. The town of Niagara Falls didn't return to normal after the Colburn murders. It couldn't. The image of that beautiful family, ripped from life in one unspeakable night, settled like a permanent shadow over the community. In neighborhoods where doors were once left unlocked, families now installed alarm systems. Children were no longer allowed to walk to school alone. Park attendance plummeted. Tourists, once excited to hike Devil's Hole or take in the quiet trails, now crossed it off their lists. Even local businesses felt it. Shops near the park closed early. One cafe owner admitted she started sleeping with a bat beside her bed. It's not just fear, she told a reporter. It's the not knowing. That's what eats you. Grief had morphed into unease, then into silent resignation. For many, the killer had become a faceless ghost that could return any night to any home without warning. No one felt that silence more than Eleanor's sister, Marie Sandoval, a 36-year-old ER nurse who had practically helped raise Eleanor after their parents died in a car accident when they were teenagers. Marie had spoken to Eleanor the night of the murders. It was a casual call, talking about Lucy's birthday, recipes, and Eleanor's plans to repaint the kitchen. Nothing unusual. And then, less than 12 hours later, they were gone. Marie was the one who had called the police after Eleanor failed to answer repeated calls. She was also the one who had to identify their bodies at the morgue. For Marie, grief wasn't quiet. It was screaming, panic attacks, sleepless nights, and years of asking one question: why them? She left her job a month later and moved to Buffalo. But she never let go. She kept every news clipping, every police update, and a private notebook filled with dates, names, and theories. Detective Raymond Alder didn't take the collapse of Operation Falls Silence lightly. He continued working the case even after it was shut down, though he was reassigned to property crimes. He'd drive out to the Devil's Hole trailhead once a month and walk the perimeter, searching for anything, something he might have missed. He kept a copy of the Colburn family photo in his desk drawer, the same one he had placed at the podium during his last press conference. Alder had solved dozens of violent crimes in his career, but this one stayed with him. The way the bodies were arranged, he once told a journalist, that wasn't impulse. That was intention. Still, without evidence, he was powerless. After 3 years, he stopped getting official support. After 5, he stopped giving interviews. Eventually, Alder retired, but in private, he continued building his own files, quietly feeding his obsession with a ghost he couldn't catch. For Jamie's best friend, Dylan Ridge, the trauma ran deep. Dylan was supposed to spend the night at the Colburn house the evening they were murdered, but his mom made him stay home because of a family trip the next morning. Dylan was 14 then. Today he still lives in Niagara Falls and rarely talks about that time. It messed me up, he told a local podcast years later. I didn't go to the funeral. Couldn't. Just seeing the closed casket was enough. He had nightmares for years. Therapy didn't help much. He stopped going to school for a while and developed a habit of walking the perimeter of his neighborhood every night, just to make sure everything looked normal. In his adult life, he turned that anxiety into routine. Dylan now works as a security consultant. But every August 3rd, without fail, he goes silent. People think the killer vanished, he said, but I think he watches. The media attention eventually faded, but myths began to grow. Some said the killer was a trucker who passed through town once and never came back. Others believed it was someone local, someone who knew the trails and how to move without being seen. One urban legend suggested the killer lived inside a cave along the gorge, emerging only to stalk his prey. The nickname Ghost of the Falls spread beyond the newspapers. It became a campfire story. Teenagers dared each other to walk the Devil's Hole Trail at night. Some even spray-painted "Ghost was here" along the guardrails. These stories only deepened the mystery. For the grieving, though, it was torture. The loss was real, not folklore. A family had been butchered, and their killer was still breathing somewhere. The town's new generation, especially those who are young, became shaped by fear. Police officers trained with the Colburn case as a cautionary tale of how quickly a peaceful night can turn into something monstrous. Local schools added crisis drills, and some teachers quietly used the Colburn story to explain why stranger danger still mattered. A group of college students even wrote a research thesis on the case, suggesting the killer may have had law enforcement or Park Service ties. It gained attention online, briefly reigniting public interest. But it too faded. Without new leads or evidence, every theory hit a dead end. And for Marie, the deeper she dug, the less she found. She'd sit in her Buffalo apartment, staring at crime scene photos, mouthing Eleanor's name like a prayer. Something about the quiet still didn't sit right. One late night in the following year, Marie received an anonymous letter. It was postmarked from Syracuse, with no return address. Inside was a single sentence typed on a blank sheet of paper. "You're asking the wrong questions." That was it. No name, no signature, just that message. Marie handed it over to police, but the envelope yielded no fingerprints. Investigators believed it could have been a cruel hoax, but Marie wasn't convinced. The phrasing, the timing, it felt intentional. Someone was watching. Someone knew she hadn't stopped digging, and maybe they wanted her to stop. The letter wasn't proof of anything concrete, but it reignited her obsession. If someone was still out there, and if they knew about her efforts, then this story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The emotional toll extended beyond family and friends. Several first responders who had worked the Colburn crime scene reported symptoms of PTSD. One paramedic had to leave the profession entirely. Another, Officer T.J. Nolan, had been one of the first on the scene at Devil's Hole. In interviews years later, he recalled the overwhelming silence at the ravine, the way the birds had gone quiet, the stillness of the air. It was like the earth was holding its breath, he said, like even nature was afraid. Nolan retired early and relocated to Maine. He refused to discuss the case publicly afterward, though he did leave one line in a private email to Alder. The killer walked in that night like he'd been there before. By 2002, just 3 years after the Colburn family was buried side by side at Oakwood Cemetery, Niagara Falls had already begun to bury the memory of what happened. The house they once lived in was repainted, sold to a retired couple from out of state who didn't know the full history. The neighborhood got quieter, but not in a peaceful way, more like a town waiting for something to happen again. The trails around Devil's Hole reopened, but fewer people walked them. Park rangers said the woods felt different. "The birds don't sing the same anymore," one of them remarked. A local teen graffiti tagged a tree near the crime scene with the words, "Still watching." For a while, police investigated it as a possible message from the killer, but it turned out to be nothing, just another shadow in a town full of them. Marie Sandoval had changed, too. The sister who once threw birthday parties for Lucy and braided Eleanor's hair at family reunions became someone quieter, more inward. She went back to nursing, but she was different now, colder, sharper, emotionally distant. Patients said she was efficient but not warm. Colleagues learned not to ask her about the newspaper clippings taped inside her locker. She still lived in Buffalo, but her apartment was a time capsule. Boxes full of reports, maps, timelines, and photographs covered her walls. Every few months, she would drive the 90-minute trip back to Niagara Falls, sit outside the Colburn home in her car, and stare. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. "It's not about finding him anymore," she told herself once. "It's about not letting him disappear." Detective Raymond Alder finally retired in 2004. He was 58 and worn out. Years of chasing ghosts had left their mark, bags under his eyes, a failed marriage, and a reputation for being obsessive. Still, he kept everything from the Colburn case. His garage was packed with files, interviews, maps, and unprocessed leads. He built his own bulletin board, complete with red string and thumbtacks like something out of a movie. But this wasn't fiction. Alder knew that. That's why it haunted him so deeply. In 2006, a new cold case unit invited him back for consultation. He agreed, but quickly realized the new generation didn't share his sense of urgency. One young officer asked him, "What if the guy's dead already?" Alder left the station early that day and never returned. Some nights he'd wake up convinced he had missed something, some tiny thread. But every time he went back to the files, the silence stared back. The surviving friends and neighbors of the Colburns gradually built new lives, but none of them were untouched. Jamie's best friend Dylan Ridge moved to Rochester and started a family. But every August 3rd, the anniversary of the murders, he would post a black square on his social media page. No words, just the date. His wife eventually asked him why he did it. "Because he never got a chance to grow up," Dylan replied. "And I did." For many, the Colburn murders marked a line, before and after. Some kids who had grown up hearing the story swore they saw a figure standing near the Devil's Hole Trail at night. Others claimed the killer never left town, just changed names. Conspiracy theories circulated online. But the truth, it was simpler. He had vanished, and no one, not even the most determined, could find him. Even the physical evidence began to degrade with time. Boxes of material from the original investigation were moved into cold storage. DNA samples collected in 1999 were eventually retested with newer technology, but the results were inconclusive. The murder weapons, believed to be sharp hunting blades, were never found. Without fingerprints, without surveillance, and with no witnesses, nothing new could be added to the file. By 2007, the Colburn case was referenced in criminal justice lectures as an example of a complete forensic ghost. No footprints, no skin cells, not even a tire track. Experts began to believe the killer may have used bleach or other methods to erase evidence before fleeing. Some speculated he lived in Canada and crossed the border after the murders. Others said he must have been trained, military, maybe law enforcement. But those were just educated guesses. The truth remained buried, somewhere only one man knew. Marie had lost faith in the system by then. She no longer trusted police, the FBI, or even some of the forensic experts she once admired. In 2008, she filed a Freedom of Information request to gain full access to the Colburn case file. It was denied. She appealed. Denied again. The excuse? Ongoing interest in the case. To Marie, that was a lie. No one was investigating anymore. No one except her. She started working with an underground group of amateur sleuths online, people who tracked cold cases, hunted serial killers, and built digital timelines. They gave her new eyes, new tools, new possibilities. One of them introduced her to mapping software that let her cross-reference trail maps with park ranger schedules and weather data from that night in 1999. Marie found patterns, but none led to a face, just more questions, more silence. The only time the case came close to reopening was in 2009, when a man in Vermont was arrested for a triple homicide that bore eerie similarities to the Colburn murders. Same weapon, same body arrangement, same absence of clues. But after months of investigation, DNA proved the Vermont suspect wasn't involved in the Niagara Falls case. Marie had allowed herself to believe, just briefly, that it was over, that the nightmare had a name. But when the results came back negative, something in her broke. She stopped sleeping again. She took leave from work. She called Alder, hoping to hear some reassurance, but Alder didn't answer. A few weeks later, she learned he had moved to Arizona. No forwarding address, just gone. Like the man they had both chased for so long. By the 10th anniversary of the murders in 2009, only a handful of people still remembered the Colburns with clarity. A small memorial was held at the park, attended mostly by older locals and former co-workers. Marie went, standing far in the back, unnoticed. She wore black, said nothing, just watched. A reporter covering the memorial asked her if she was a relative. Marie only nodded. That night, she sat in her car outside Devil's Hole, staring into the gorge as the sun went down. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But she felt something, an unease she hadn't felt in years, like something was waking up, or watching. She couldn't explain it. But in that moment, she whispered aloud, "You're still out there." And for the first time in a long while, she felt she was right. The story of the Colburn family began to drift into the background of local history. New tragedies filled the news cycle. New faces took over the police force. People moved. New families moved in. The murder house eventually sold again, this time to a couple who were told its history, but chose to ignore it. "It's just a house," the husband told a local paper. "We don't believe in ghosts." But the locals remembered. Every so often someone would walk past and pause, not because of superstition, but because they knew what had happened inside, and what hadn't been answered. Then came the fall of 2009, the 10th year since the murders, a decade of silence. Marie was still watching, still waiting. She had become a ghost herself in some ways, haunting the digital corners of cold case forums, digging through public records, reaching out to anyone who might still care. She kept the photograph, the one of Jamie and the unknown man, inside her wallet. She believed it was important, maybe even the key, but no one else did. Not until a call came in from an out-of-town documentary filmmaker interested in revisiting the Colburn case for a true crime series. He had one tool Marie didn't: drone access. What he captured in those woods, completely by accident, would change everything. It was a bright morning in early October 2009 when filmmaker Evan Millard arrived in Niagara Falls with a drone, a camera crew, and a folder labeled The Colburn Files. Evan wasn't from the area. He had grown up in Albany, but the Colburn case had haunted him since college, where a criminology professor had used the murders as an example of a perfect cold case. Now in his early 30s, Evan was producing an independent true crime docuseries focused on unsolved family murders. The Colburn story had always stood out: beautiful location, no suspects, and a trail that had gone completely cold. He hadn't expected much more than interviews and historical footage. But during pre-production scouting, his assistant suggested drone footage of Devil's Hole, something cinematic to open the episode. Evan agreed. They launched the drone from a clearing near the trailhead and flew it toward the edge of the gorge. What they captured would stop them cold. The footage began smoothly, sweeping shots of the gorge, the roaring river below, thick autumn leaves clinging to the cliffs. Then, as the drone curved slightly east, the camera picked up something strange. In a small clearing off the marked trail, half buried beneath fallen brush and overgrown vines, was what looked like a man-made structure. The drone's camera zoomed in. There, nearly camouflaged, was a wooden trapdoor. Rotten, cracked, and partially collapsed inward, but unmistakably a door leading into the ground. Evan's crew landed the drone immediately. At first, they assumed it was part of an old park utility building, or maybe a ranger supply cache. But when they radioed the site manager, he denied any such structure. "That area's off-grid," he said, "no maintenance buildings." Nothing should be there. That evening, Evan reviewed the footage frame by frame. The more he stared, the more unsettled he became. That door had been there a long time. Within 48 hours, Evan contacted Niagara County Police. He handed over the footage and explained what they had found. At first, the authorities were skeptical. Drone sightings often turned up abandoned hunting blinds or old storm shelters. But when officers visited the location, accompanied by park rangers, they discovered something else entirely. The trapdoor was real, weather-worn and camouflaged beneath a tangle of branches and decades of decay. It had no markings, no hinges, and no path leading to it. A crowbar was used to pry it open. Beneath it, a narrow staircase descended into darkness. The air that came out was foul, stale, wet, and heavy. Officers waited for backup and returned with hazmat gear, portable lights, and breathing masks. What they found inside would reframe the entire Colburn case and finally give Marie something she had waited 10 years for, a sign that the killer had never truly left. The underground space was a crude bunker, carved partially into the bedrock, reinforced with plywood and steel sheeting. It wasn't large, maybe 10 by 10 feet, but it was detailed. Along one wall was a rusted metal table stained with dark blotches. Another wall was lined with shelves containing old tools, ropes, a hacksaw, and a small lantern. But the most disturbing part was the back wall, covered in plastic sheeting and what appeared to be duct-taped newspaper clippings, all yellowed and curling with age. Some were about the Colburn murders, others were about unrelated disappearances across the Northeast. On a hook nearby hung an empty camera case, but the real shock came when forensics found a sealed container buried in the dirt floor. Inside were photographs, at least a dozen, each showing the Colburn family taken from a distance, clearly without their knowledge. The killer had stalked them for weeks, maybe months, before striking. The news hit the media within 72 hours. Local headlines screamed, "Colburn case reopened after hidden bunker found," and killer may have watched victims for weeks. Marie saw the first news alert while standing in the break room of her hospital. She dropped her coffee. Her hands started shaking. The anchor on screen said one phrase that rang in her ears louder than anything else. Police say new evidence may point toward the killer's identity. For Marie, those words hit like thunder. She immediately requested time off work, drove straight to Niagara Falls, and demanded a meeting with the investigators on the case. At first, they hesitated. But when Marie presented the photo of Jamie and the unknown man, their tone changed. "We need to compare this," one officer said, "because there's a chance. He may be in the bunker files." For Marie, hope, sharp, painful, electric, returned all at once. As forensic teams combed through the underground room, they uncovered more than just photographs. Tucked into the wall paneling behind a false beam was a burned notebook, partially legible. It contained disturbing sketches, outlines of faces, park trails, lists of names. Some had been crossed out. At the very bottom of one page, a name was scribbled in erratic handwriting, S. Redpath. Investigators immediately began running the name through databases, but there was nothing current. No driver's license, no tax records. The name didn't exist in state employment systems, utilities, or known aliases. It was either a false identity or someone who had deliberately erased their digital footprint. But then came the chilling coincidence. The name Redpath matched a short hiking trail in Devil's Hole Park, one that curved off the main path and looped directly above the location of the bunker. Suddenly, it wasn't just a name, it was a message. The killer had left a clue in plain sight for a decade. Marie was allowed access to several non-sensitive photographs recovered from the bunker. When she saw them, something inside her shattered. One image showed Lucy Colburn riding her bike down her driveway. Another was of Eleanor, hanging clothes on the line. One showed Richard Colburn locking his park vehicle near the gorge. These weren't random snapshots. They were surveillance, intimate, close, taken by someone who was always nearby. Marie stared at the image of Eleanor for a long time. Her sister was smiling, oblivious, serene. But the camera angle was so low, so hidden, it made Marie's skin crawl. "He was there," she whispered to the detective beside her. "He was there the whole time." Marie asked to see the bunker. Authorities declined, citing contamination and safety. But one young officer told her quietly, "You don't want to go down there. It's not a place for people who loved them." That night, Marie stayed in a motel just outside town. She didn't sleep. She laid the photo of Jamie and the unknown man beside the images from the bunker. For the first time, she noticed something she hadn't before. In one photo from the bunker, a blurry reflection in a window pane, there was the silhouette of a man. Hat, jacket, same profile, same body type. Her hands trembled as she texted the lead detective. "I think we've seen him before." They scheduled a forensic match the next day. When digital analysts enhanced the photo, the shape aligned with the figure in Marie's original image. Same height, same shoulder width. It was a breakthrough, small, grainy, and still technically circumstantial, but for the first time in 10 years, Marie had a direction, and the ghost of the falls had a shadow. The town reacted with a mix of horror and relief. For some, it meant the killer might still be alive, and close. For others, it meant finally, after 10 years, there was a crack in the wall of silence. The Colburn case was reopened officially. Media outlets returned. Old wounds were ripped wide open, and for the families who had moved on, or tried to, the fear came flooding back. "We thought it was over," one neighbor told reporters. "Turns out he might have been here all along." Park attendance dropped again. Police cordoned off large sections of Devil's Hole. A new task force was formed, led by cold case experts, cyber analysts, and forensic profilers. And at the center of it all stood Marie Sandoval, older now, tired, but with fire behind her eyes. "I told you," she said. "He's still out there." The Niagara County Sheriff's Office officially reopened the Colburn investigation on October 18, 2009, 10 years, 2 months, and 15 days after the murders. It began with a press conference held outside the department's headquarters. The sheriff confirmed the discovery of the underground bunker and stated that evidence recovered from the site included photographs, materials with biological residue, and other items of forensic interest. Behind closed doors that meant blood, trace amounts found on the rusted metal table, confirmed through early analysis to contain degraded human DNA. While it was too damaged to make an exact match, the sample was being fast-tracked to Quantico. FBI profilers joined the task force. For the first time in a decade, new case files were opened. The original case number NF9908 Colburn was reclassified as active homicide. For Marie Sandoval, those words were like lightning. But they also came with a cost. Reopening the investigation meant reliving every single moment of trauma again. Marie was brought in not as a witness, but as a consultant, the one person who had studied the case longer and more obsessively than anyone. She provided all of her collected materials, timelines, maps, the anonymous letter, and the photo of the unknown man with Jamie. She also gave them access to her digital network of cold case sleuths, which included amateur investigators with backgrounds in everything from data analysis to former law enforcement. Some within the department resisted the idea of civilians being involved, but the lead detective, Jenna Clark, was forward-thinking and believed in using every tool available. Marie and Jenna formed an unlikely bond, two women from very different worlds, united by obsession. But as the case moved forward, Marie began to feel the emotional toll creep in, seeing photos of her sister again, her niece, her nephew, knowing they had been watched, hunted. It began to reopen wounds that had never fully healed. One of the most important discoveries came from forensic digital analysis. The photographs found in the bunker had timestamps, though they were damaged and partial. Using enhanced metadata recovery tools, analysts were able to confirm that at least 5 of the photographs had been taken with the same camera found inside the Colburn's home, a camera believed to have gone missing the night of the murders. This meant the killer had not only taken the family's lives, but had also returned to their home after the crime, possibly to retrieve the camera, or had brought it with him beforehand. That revelation shifted the entire timeline of the murders. Investigators now theorized the killer had been inside the house longer than they originally thought. He may have entered before the family even sat down for dinner. That detail horrified everyone on the task force. "He didn't just kill them," one analyst said. "He studied them. He stalked them." Then he waited. Detective Clark began re-examining all past suspects and persons of interest, anyone previously cleared or overlooked. This included several rangers, seasonal workers, and out-of-state contractors who had access to the park during the summer of 1999. One name stood out: Samuel Redpath, a temporary park maintenance worker listed on payroll records for a 3-week period in July that year. The surname matched the one found written inside the burned notebook from the bunker. However, there was no tax record, no forwarding address, and no employment file with a photo. Only a signed name on a roster, no social security number, no ID on file. That discovery raised new questions. Was Samuel Redpath even real? Was it an alias? Or had someone inserted the name after the fact? Clark assigned 2 agents to dig into archived employment records from that summer. The deeper they looked, the more it seemed that Redpath had never existed at all. Someone had created the ghost. While the task force focused on tracking Redpath, Marie focused on the map recovered from the bunker. The crude drawing had marked trails, circled times of day, and strange symbols, X's, triangles, arrows. At first, none of it made sense, but when she overlaid it with current trail maps and GPS data from 1999, something clicked. The X's lined up perfectly with public rest areas, park bathrooms, and vending stations. "He mapped foot traffic," she said aloud. The killer had studied where people gathered, how long they stayed, where the shadows fell at different hours. It was more than planning, it was tactical. Clark brought in a behavioral profiler from Quantico who confirmed what Marie already suspected. This wasn't his first crime. The Colburns weren't a spontaneous target. They were selected, watched, chosen. The profiler believed the killer may have experimented with stalking and surveillance before, maybe even tried and failed with other victims. That raised a new question. Were there more? Another forensic breakthrough came when investigators retested trace fibers found on the Colburns' clothing in 1999. The original lab reports had been inconclusive, but new methods allowed for more precise identification. One thread was a synthetic material used in military-grade canvas bags, typically found in supply kits. Another was a distinctive black polyester blend used in uniforms manufactured for private security firms. That pointed investigators to an entirely new avenue, contract security companies active in the area during the late 90s. Marie compiled a list of all such companies working within a 50-mile radius of Niagara Falls between 1997 and 2000. It was long, dozens of names, but only one stood out. Graves Protection Services, a now-defunct company with contracts at several state parks. One of their contract sites? Devil's Hole State Park, summer of 1999. As investigators followed this new lead, they encountered missing records, shut down offices, and one chilling coincidence. Graves Protection Services abruptly dissolved in early 2000, just months after the Colburn murders. Its owner, Bernard Graves, died of a heart attack shortly after. No former employees could be found, at least not easily. It was as if the company had vanished. But then, through a stroke of luck, a former HR manager was located in Ohio. When interviewed, she recalled something odd. A man hired under the name Stephen R., with no prior work history and no listed references. He kept to himself. Tall guy. Always wore gloves even when it was hot, she said. I don't remember his last name. Just that he gave me the creeps, that detail, the gloves, stuck with Clark. In the original witness testimony from 1999, a traveler had described seeing a man with gloves walking into the woods the night of the murders. Was Stephen R. really Samuel Redpath? Marie, meanwhile, was struggling. As the investigation picked up momentum, her emotional state began to fracture. Old nightmares returned, images of Lucy's favorite stuffed toy, of Jamie's braces, of Eleanor's perfume. Every new discovery was a gut punch, but she kept going. One night, while sorting through her sister's recovered belongings, she found something she had forgotten, a camcorder tape, labeled simply July 1999 Picnic. She watched it on an old player. Most of it was ordinary, Richard grilling hot dogs, Lucy chasing bubbles, Eleanor laughing. But then, as Jamie panned the camera toward the tree line, Marie froze. In the corner of the frame for just 2 seconds was a man, standing still, watching, wearing gloves. Marie paused the tape and took a photo of the screen. It wasn't a clear image, but it was more than they had before. The tape was sent to digital analysts who attempted frame enhancement. The man's face was turned slightly away, but his build, posture, and clothing matched the figure from the photo of Jamie and the unknown man. The investigators now had 3 separate media captures of the same possible suspect, enough to begin building a digital composite. They also created a time-lapse profile simulating how the man might look a decade older. That profile was sent to border agencies, military databases, and Interpol. As leads began trickling in, something became clear. They were getting close. The investigation had gained momentum, but what came next would shake not only the task force, but the entire town of Niagara Falls. Less than 3 weeks after reopening the Colburn case, digital analysts finalized the enhanced composite from the 3 separate visual sources: Jamie's photo, the bunker window reflection, and the camcorder tape. The composite depicted a man in his early 30s at the time of the murders, tall, lean, with angular features, sunken eyes, and short-cropped dark hair. Using age progression software, they generated what he might look like in his 40s. That image was run through facial recognition databases tied to military records and federal contractor IDs. At 2:46 a.m. on November 9, 2009, a match was found. A former private contractor named Stephen Rayner, who worked under various subcontracting firms from 1996 to 2001. One of those firms? Graves Protection Services. The name hit like a bomb. They finally had a name, and he wasn't dead. He had simply disappeared on purpose. But it was what came next that disturbed investigators even more. A deeper background check revealed that Stephen Rayner was never formally fingerprinted or background checked by Graves Protection Services. In fact, several employees hired under that same firm were missing similar documentation. It turned out the company had bypassed standard vetting through an under-the-table recruitment method, one that specifically sourced workers through military discharge transition programs. These were men coming out of special operations, black ops units, and even private security firms with overseas connections. Men like Rayner, who left the military under circumstances listed as undisclosed. When agents requested his full military file, they were met with multiple heavily redacted pages. What little was visible included words like counter-surveillance, covert ops, and terminated mission access. It became horrifyingly clear. The man who killed the Colburn family had training, and he knew how to vanish. Detective Clark and her team pushed harder, demanding access to deeper government files. That led them to a now-retired Army intelligence officer who had supervised a team Rayner was once assigned to in 1994. In a closed-door interview, the officer admitted that Rayner had been unstable. He'd reportedly gone AWOL twice, once for nearly a month. Each time he returned without explanation. His behavior became erratic. He was obsessed with maps, with stalking patterns, and once told a fellow operative he could erase someone so clean they'd think it was the wind. Rayner was quietly discharged in 1995 after an undisclosed psychological review and faded from official records. When asked why there wasn't more surveillance or restriction afterward, the officer replied coldly, "Because he wasn't our problem anymore." That moment landed hard on the task force. They weren't just dealing with a killer. They were dealing with someone the government had quietly released, and then forgotten. Marie took the news with a terrifying calm. She'd spent 10 years building this profile, and now she finally had a name to attach to the monster in her memories. Stephen Rayner, she said aloud, testing it on her tongue. It sounded wrong, like it didn't belong to a human. But what disturbed her most wasn't just the name. It was what the investigation uncovered next: Rayner's ties to other disappearances. Analysts began comparing the Colburn bunker to other unsolved crimes across the Northeast. One case from 1997 in Pennsylvania involved a missing couple found posed in a similar manner, hidden in a wooded ravine, stripped of ID, with no signs of forced entry. Another in 1998, near the Vermont border, involved a single mother and her daughter, Both vanished, later discovered in a storm drain system. Posed, silent, forgotten. These cases had never been connected until now. Patterns emerged, each location near heavily forested parks, always within 100 miles of a state border. All victims were families or pairs. No robbery, no messages, just surgical violence and vanishing. And in nearly every case, one detail stood out. Surveillance before the crime, missing family photos, discarded cameras, signs someone had been watching. The FBI began reclassifying these cases as potentially linked. And with each new file, Marie felt her stomach turn. "We weren't the only ones," she whispered. "He's done this before." Maybe even after Detective Clark assigned a new subunit to follow this thread. They called it Project Hollow. The name was taken from something written in Rayner's burned notebook. They are hollow. That's why they're easy to break. As Project Hollow unfolded, another bombshell dropped. An analyst going through Rayner's military-connected housing records discovered something stunning. In the summer of 1999, Rayner had rented a trailer on the outskirts of Niagara County, registered under an alias but matched to his known handwriting. When authorities located the trailer park, it had long since changed ownership, but one resident, an elderly woman named Irene, remembered a strange man who lived there briefly. He never talked, she said. Always wore gloves. Even when he mowed the lawn, she also recalled seeing him photographing birds near the woods. When shown a photo of Rayner's composite, she shivered. That's him. That's the man. He was polite, but there was nothing in his eyes. This placed Rayner not just in the region, but inside the kill zone, at the exact time of the Colburn murders. The next break came unexpectedly, from a source no one expected to cooperate. A former employee of Graves Protection Services, using an encrypted tip line, reached out anonymously. They admitted that Rayner had once shown disturbing photos to co-workers at a bar, images of families, parks, children. He said he was practicing surveillance, the tipster wrote. We thought he was just weird. But looking back, and I think he was planning something. The tipster refused to go public, but gave one more crucial detail. Rayner had spoken often about perfecting disappearance. That phrase matched something Marie had written in her notebook years ago, a theory that the killer had a plan for every stage: stalk, isolate, destroy, erase. The final shocking revelation came from the forensic lab. Blood recovered from the bunker's rusted table matched Jamie Colburn's mitochondrial DNA. That was it. Scientific confirmation that the killer had been in that room, had possibly taken the Colburns there before the final murders, or at least used it to stage part of the crime. Investigators now believed the killer may have lured the family out under false pretenses, possibly posing as a ranger or safety inspector, before bringing them to the site. That theory was supported by Jamie's old friend Dylan, who remembered Jamie mentioning that a park guy had given him a sticker 2 days before the murders. No such ranger was ever confirmed. Rayner had used trust as a weapon. He knew how to look official, how to seem invisible, and it had worked. For a decade. The truth was almost too much to bear. For Marie, for the community, for the nation, once the story began hitting national headlines again. Because now, they weren't just facing a man who had gotten away with murder. They were confronting the terrifying idea that others might have helped him, through negligence, silence, or willful ignorance. The system had failed, and a family had paid the price. By late November 2009, there was no longer any doubt in the minds of the task force. Stephen Rayner was the man who had murdered the Colburn family. The digital composites matched. The recovered photographs proved premeditation. The blood sample in the bunker matched Jamie Colburn's DNA. Surveillance photos from the 1999 camcorder and the bunker reflection revealed the same man, always on the edge of the frame, always watching. The challenge now wasn't who, it was where. Rayner had lived off-grid before. If he was alive, he would be hard to find. The task force partnered with U.S. Marshals and the FBI's Fugitive Apprehension Division. They built a profile. Rayner was intelligent, disciplined, highly trained in counter-tracking. But everyone has a pattern, and Rayner had one flaw: his obsession with control. That flaw, they hoped, would be his undoing. And then, just before Thanksgiving, an old property file gave them the break they needed. The address was a remote hunting cabin in northern Maine, near the Canadian border. It had been purchased in 2001 under the name Stephen R. Lane. The payment was made in cash, no mortgage, no paper trail beyond a single tax document filed once, and then never again. When investigators pulled satellite imagery, the cabin was barely visible beneath heavy forest. No power lines, no visible driveway. But two things stood out: a recently used woodpile and a narrow, man-made trail leading to the rear of the property. Drone surveillance confirmed the presence of activity: light smoke from a chimney, faint solar panel reflections, and what appeared to be movement inside. They had found him. After 10 years, the man who vanished without a trace was sitting in a forest cabin, like a ghost waiting to disappear again. The task force prepared for an operation they knew would be dangerous. They were confronting a trained killer on his turf. Marie was not informed of the raid until it was already underway. She sat in a Buffalo police office, staring at a digital map, when Clark entered with the news. They found him. For a moment, Marie couldn't speak. Her hands gripped the table. Her mouth went dry. "Alive?" she whispered. Clark nodded. "We think so." The FBI refused to let Marie anywhere near the site. This wasn't for closure. Not yet. This was about ending a threat. In the early hours of November 24th, a team of 12 federal agents and tactical officers surrounded the cabin. It was silent. The forest was dead still. They waited. Then they moved in, flashbangs, breach entry. And just as they stormed the room, they found no one. The cabin was empty, recently used, yes, fire still warm, food still on the table, but no sign of Rayner. He had slipped away, again. But this time, he had left something behind. In the corner of the cabin, next to a rusted toolbox, investigators found a sealed envelope addressed with one word: Marie. Inside, there was no confession, no apology, just a single photograph, an old one, taken from a distance, grainy and clearly aged. It was Marie and Eleanor as teenagers, sitting on a bench outside a movie theater. They were laughing. Behind them, barely noticeable, was a man standing at the edge of the frame, face turned away. Rayner. The message was clear. He had watched them long before 1999. Marie stared at the photo, unable to breathe. "He was planning it," she whispered. "He chose us." Years before he ever touched them, the psychological blow was devastating, not just for Marie, but for the entire team. Rayner hadn't just stalked the Colburns, he had stalked Marie too. She had been part of the story before the story even began. In the hours that followed, an all-out manhunt was launched. Border Patrol, helicopters, dogs, even Canadian authorities were alerted. Roadblocks were set up within 30 miles of the cabin. Bloodhounds tracked a scent trail that led through dense woods before abruptly stopping near a river. On the opposite bank, faint boot prints. It was confirmed Rayner had crossed into Canada. The river was waist-deep, but freezing. Agents found a shredded thermal jacket tangled in the brush. He had gone on foot, just as he had trained to do, just as he had always planned. The Canadian RCMP were put on alert, and a binational task force was formed. But Rayner had done what no one expected: escaped again. Only this time, he had left behind too much. Too many clues. Too many connections. His name was no longer a ghost story. It was real. He was real. And he was being hunted. Marie spiraled in the days after the failed raid. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. Her nightmares intensified. Therapy offered no comfort. She had spent 10 years chasing a ghost. Now the ghost had looked her in the face, handed her a photograph of her past, and vanished again. For the first time, Marie wondered if she had made a mistake reopening the case. Maybe Raynor had stayed gone for a reason. Maybe pulling him back into the light had endangered more people. But those thoughts didn't last. Because deep down, Marie knew what this really was, a confrontation delayed, not denied. He had seen her. He had chosen her. And now, she had seen him too. There was no going back. Detective Clark was relentless. She refused to let the trail die again. Through financial forensics, they discovered Raynor had a pattern of withdrawing cash from small, untraceable ATMs, never more than $200, always in remote areas, always with face coverings. A security camera in Quebec picked up a figure resembling him just 2 days after the cabin raid. Authorities couldn't confirm identity due to low resolution, but the gait, build, and clothing matched. Another image, taken outside a small gas station in New Brunswick, showed a man in a dark coat walking away from the pump. Again, similar posture. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. Raynor was running, not hiding, not this time. As weeks passed, Marie made a difficult choice. She sat down for her first national interview, a primetime special airing just before Christmas. In it, she spoke directly to Raynor. "You don't get to hide anymore," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You don't get to live your quiet life in the shadows. You killed a family. You broke people. You don't get to vanish. I will never stop looking for you." The footage went viral. The internet lit up with amateur sleuths, Reddit theories, and digital bounties. Raynor's face was no longer anonymous. He couldn't walk through a town, a bus station, a grocery store, without wondering who was watching. The confrontation wasn't just between him and Marie now. It was with the entire country. But for all the momentum, the case took a toll. Marie's health declined. She lost weight, stopped answering calls. Even Clark admitted to needing time away from the case. "He's still controlling us," she said, "even from a distance. That's the cruelty of it." Survivors like Dylan Ridge, the friend who was supposed to sleep over at the Colburns that night, spoke out publicly for the first time. "It feels like the scab was ripped open again," he said, "but maybe that's what it takes." Maybe healing starts with pain. Marie returned to Devil's Hole just once more that winter. Snow covered the ground. The trees stood still and bare. She walked to the edge of the ravine where her family had been found, clutching the photograph Raynor had left her. There was no comfort, no peace, but there was resolve. "I'll never let you disappear again," she whispered. And this time, she meant it. By January 2010, the world knew the name Stephen Raynor. It had taken a decade, thousands of man-hours, a recovered underground bunker, and the relentless obsession of one grieving sister to expose him. His face was everywhere, on news tickers, digital billboards, FBI Most Wanted posters, and message boards across the internet. Yet still, he remained elusive. The last confirmed sighting placed him near a rural highway in Quebec, 3 days after the raid on his cabin. After that, he vanished again, but unlike before, he was no longer in control. The pressure was mounting. Authorities had traced a pattern. Raynor had used a network of off-grid cabins, cash-only transactions, and survivalist communities to stay hidden. But the world had changed. Surveillance was sharper. People were watching, and his circle of escape was closing. Detective Jenna Clark refused to let momentum fade. Working alongside Canadian intelligence, the task force tracked down one of Raynor's former military contacts, a man who once served in the same covert operations unit. In a tense, off-the-record conversation, he confirmed that Raynor had spoken often about living beyond the grid. He'd been obsessed with survivalist ideologies, post-collapse theories, and perfecting what he called the art of absence. But what stuck with the agents most was something this man said in passing. Stephen always believed he was smarter than death. He didn't fear consequences because he didn't think they applied to him. That insight helped behavioral analysts predict his next move, not a disappearance, but a repositioning. Rayner wouldn't flee forever. He'd reestablish control somewhere new, quietly, carefully. The team just had to anticipate where. Then came a crucial lead. A tip from a hiker in Nova Scotia who spotted an isolated shelter along a coastal cliff previously thought abandoned. The man claimed he saw movement just a flicker through a narrow slat in the wall. The team dispatched drones and mounted a covert approach. As they neared the shelter, they saw no smoke, no sound, no sign of life. But what they found inside was unmistakable. Rayner had been there. A small burner stove, dried food, and a binder full of handwritten notes. On the cover was a name, Sandoval. Inside were pages of notes, some dating back to 1996. Observations, descriptions, schedules, photos. He had been watching Marie far longer than anyone realized. Every job she'd taken, every apartment she lived in, every person she'd dated. He had documented it all. For Marie, seeing those pages was like staring into a mirror warped by madness. One entry chilled the task force to the bone. It read, Plan B, if found, return control. Force final meeting, one-on-one. They now believed Rayner had a suicide plan, not one of escape, but of ending his story on his own terms. He wanted a final confrontation, something personal, something that gave him a twisted sense of power. It was horrifying, but it gave them a vital clue. Rayner wouldn't vanish. He'd be watching, waiting for the right moment to confront the one person who'd hunted him relentlessly for a decade. That person was Marie. Despite the risks, Marie agreed to a carefully monitored, controlled meeting, a psychological trap set to draw Rayner out. It was staged as a press event in Niagara Falls. Marie would give a speech at a memorial for the Colburns to mark the 10-year anniversary of their murders. The event would be broadcast live. Police would be hidden throughout the crowd. Facial recognition systems would scan every face. Snipers were posted at key angles. Marie wore a hidden mic and panic transmitter. The goal was simple: draw him out. The risk was enormous. "He may try to kill you," Clark said bluntly. Marie didn't blink. "He already did," she replied. On February 8, 2010, the memorial began at dusk. The crowd gathered under cold gray skies, candles flickering in the wind. Marie stood at the podium dressed in black, holding a photo of Eleanor. Her voice was steady but heavy. "For 10 years, I have searched for answers, for justice, for peace. I stand here tonight not as a victim, but as a witness to what happens when evil hides in silence." Her eyes scanned the crowd. She didn't know if he was out there, but she spoke directly to him anyway. "You watched us, but we saw you, and we're not afraid anymore." The crowd erupted in applause. For 5 long minutes, nothing happened. And then a silent alert hit the FBI van. Facial recognition had flagged a face in the crowd. It was him. Stephen Rayner was standing 25 feet away, partially disguised in a gray parka, beard, and sunglasses. But the system matched his bone structure, gait, and ear shape. Within seconds, tactical teams closed in. He didn't run. He didn't move. When officers swarmed, he raised his hands, and then, slowly, deliberately, he removed his sunglasses and looked directly at Marie. Their eyes met. For a moment, the crowd disappeared. It was just them. 10 years of obsession, 10 years of nightmares, 10 years of silence, broken. As officers cuffed him and pulled him back, Marie didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply stared. And in that moment, Rayner smiled. The arrest made headlines around the world. The ghost of the falls was no longer a ghost. He was flesh, blood, and behind bars. In the weeks that followed, investigators uncovered more fingerprints from the Nova Scotia shelter, handwriting samples that matched the notebook, and a lockbox containing DNA traces from at least 3 other victims across state lines. The evidence was overwhelming. Rayner was tied to at least 5 separate murder cases and suspected in up to 9. He refused to confess, refused to speak, but it no longer mattered. The truth had become undeniable. Marie was granted a private moment in the courtroom during the pre-trial hearings. She stood just 20 feet from Rayner. He looked smaller now, older, but the air around him still pulsed with that strange, clinical coldness. She expected him to speak, to gloat, but he didn't. He simply stared at her, expressionless. It was Marie who broke the silence. "You took everything from me," she said, "but you don't get to take this moment. This is mine." Rayner blinked slowly as if studying her, then looked away. That was it. The reckoning had come. The trial of Stephen Rayner began in the summer of 2010 under intense security and a media circus that stretched far beyond the borders of Niagara County. Victim advocates, journalists, and former residents of the town gathered daily outside the courthouse. The name Colburn became synonymous with one of the most harrowing and perplexing cases in modern criminal history. The evidence was devastating. Forensic experts presented the photos recovered from the underground bunker, each time-stamped and connected directly to the Colburn family. Analysts testified about the DNA recovered from the rusted table, proven to be Jamie Colburn's. Security footage, eyewitness testimony, and digital trail analysis all pointed to one undeniable truth. Rayner had stalked, studied, and murdered the Colburns with premeditated cruelty. He never took the stand, never looked up. His defense tried to argue psychological instability, but the mountain of methodical planning buried that argument completely. On August 3, 2010, exactly 11 years to the day since the Colburns were murdered, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, unlawful confinement, premeditated homicide, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The courtroom remained silent as the judge delivered the ruling. Marie sat in the front row wearing her sister's necklace, clutching a folded photo of Lucy. When the gavel fell, she closed her eyes. Not in peace, but in finality. Rayner would never walk free again. He would die behind bars. And though it didn't bring her family back, it finally gave their story an ending. The impact of the case went far beyond one man's conviction. Across New York State, legislation was proposed to strengthen background checks for private security firms and ensure tighter oversight for park contractors. The Colburn Act, as it was called, passed within a year. It mandated vetting for any employee working in state parks and required enhanced digital reporting for any off-grid structures discovered on public land. Marie testified during its drafting. Her words echoed in the chamber. "We didn't just lose a family. We lost faith in the system. Let's never let that happen again." The law became her sister's legacy, proof that even in death, Eleanor's quiet life had made a difference. Marie never returned to nursing. After the trial, she wrote a book, framed in silence, detailing her 10-year journey from grief to obsession to justice. It became a bestseller, praised not for sensationalism, but for its raw honesty. She spoke about the human cost of cold cases, not just the victims, but those left behind. In interviews, she always ended the same way. Closure is a myth, but truth is a choice. You fight for it. She donated all profits to a victim support fund named after Jamie and Lucy. A portion of those funds helped build a small memorial garden near Devil's Hole, where wildflowers now bloom each spring. At its center stands a stone engraved with 4 names, no quotes, no explanations, just the names. As if to say, they were here. They mattered. The community of Niagara Falls slowly began to heal. The town held a candlelight vigil the following year, not out of grief, but remembrance. Former park ranger colleagues of Richard Colburn restored one of his favorite trails and posted a plaque in his honor. Children once afraid to walk alone returned to the parks. Locals reported that the woods felt different now. Still, some shadows lingered. Survivors like Dylan Ridge continued to carry the weight of what if. He often walked the trail where Jamie once hiked. In a podcast years later, he said, "I forgave Rayner." Not for him, for me. Holding on to that hate doesn't bring Jamie back. It just poisons everything else. As for Rayner, he remains in a maximum security prison in upstate New York. He never spoke another word after the trial. No confession, no apology, no explanation. He exists in silence, just as he lived, just as he killed. But now the silence belongs to someone else. Marie, the families, the survivors. They reclaimed it. They turned absence into action, grief into law, memory into momentum. And though the story is over, the lessons it leaves behind echo louder than the crimes ever could. If someone took everything from you and then disappeared for years, what would you be willing to sacrifice to bring them to justice? And when that justice finally came, would it be enough?